Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
In this episode, we're talking about that experience of having a brain that just won't stop. When your thoughts feel like they're competing for airtime, when the noise inside your head feels louder than the world outside, and when everyone else seems to have this magical ability to just think less. So, Carly, what does it feel like inside your head on a typical day? Like if someone could peek inside your head, what would they see?
I think what they would see would depend on any given day. But if I was to talk about generally what it feels like in my mind, there can often be a lot going on. I kind of think about it like there's a radio in the background that is playing a song that is either stuck in my head or just that I'm loving and listening to on repeat. And then it's also playing in my head. So it's probably a song playing somewhere. There's probably another voice that's semi-singing along to that song in my head, as well as then sort of a constant inner conversation with myself, as well as, quite vivid imagery. So I would say at any given moment, I'm usually having quite vivid imagery around inside my mind, an ongoing dialogue between myself with an actual back and forth, some sort of humming or singing, and then probably a song that's got stuck in there somewhere. I'd say it's probably about it. Just that.
Just all of that. Yeah.
What would you say?
So you often see that about how many browser tabs you've got open in your brain. And I take this to extreme. Now, maybe not everybody knows this, but if you've got Chrome on your mobile, it has the little count of how many tabs you've got open, right? And that only goes up to 99. After that, you get a little smiley face. And I feel like that is how many browser windows I often have open.
Would you like me to pull up mine and show you? Oh, you can't see evidence of smiley face.
You got the smiley face too.
I have the smiley face too.
Smiley face club. Yeah. That is
a
definitely
very knowing smiley face, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I see you.
Yeah. But yeah, I would regularly have too many browser tabs open in my brain. Yeah, so lots of browser tabs open. I used to think of my internal brain system as like a system of coat hangers that would hang on to each other. So I could sort of find my way from one thing to another, often very much centered around dates. But another thing that comes to mind for me is being a fast thinker and like a problem solver. So having a fast mind so I can think really fast about lots of things and kind of seek out lots of solutions, which is great. And I love that part of me. And it's also very easily, can be very easily overwhelmed. So I have to remind myself that I can't solve everything. And that sometimes I do need to take a little step back.
I so relate to the having so many tabs open in your mind, and I really liked your analogy with like the coat hangers as well.
I don't know why it's coat hangers.
No. Yeah, I love that. So specific. Well, absolutely. And it's hard when that happens from sort of the moment that you wake up till the moment that you go to sleep. And I don't know what it's like for you, but I know some people can literally don't get a break from that, where it's literally nonstop. And depending on what's going on for me, I can actually have and experience moments of quiet up there. It's rarer. It's usually loud, busy, chaotic, lots going on. But I know I can experience that at times. So I do, I can very much understand how hard it must be to have that constantly. I kind of think at least I can have pockets of a break. But for those who don't have any pockets of a break, it makes life really, it's hard. Do you have any breaks?
So I was thinking about it as you were talking there about what is it like for me. And I feel like the only time I really get that kind of break is if I'm listening to loud music. But even then, it's obviously not silence because it's I'm listening to the words and I'm singing the words, and yeah, it is kind of constant. I can't even imagine. My husband's the kind of person who can just switch off, but I can't even imagine that. I've got no idea what that is like. Yeah.
That's the difference between those who literally have no experience of what it even means for your brain to be quiet
Hmm.
versus, myself, where I do have experience of what it's like to be
Yeah.
quiet, but it's not the norm.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed that when people say just stop overthinking, they seem to think it's as simple as just flipping a switch?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just don't think about it. That's just put it down. Just let it
Ah,
go.
thank
Yeah.
you for the helpful advice.
Yeah. They just make it sound so easy. I think some of this is about the deep thinking that I do not being valued. And I think there's certainly been times where I've absolutely been lost in overthinking in a way that hasn't been helpful, that's been more like ruminating. But I think there is a balance to be struck, and that it's really helpful for me sometimes to think deeply about things. And it's really important. Again, kind of like we said the last time, I feel like this often comes from people who don't think enough. That doesn't feel like a very nice way to put it, but yeah. And another important part is that I need a plan. Like I need a plan. And it's not an anxiety thing. It feels like an orienting myself in time and space. Yeah, just needing to know what's happening next. And otherwise I just feel like I'm like spinning round in a kind of circle.
For me, what comes up with that question is, well, what even is overthinking? Like who has the rule book that decides what is classed as overthinking?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really important question actually. Yeah, who gets to decide? And well, my answer to that is me.
Yes.
So my answer to that is I get to decide whether it's helpful or not. And maybe it is helpful for us here to kind of separate out the different kinds of loudness in our mind, the different kinds of things that might be described as overthinking.
Absolutely. Overthinking often gets confused with depth of thought,
Hmm.
a bit like you were saying earlier. So for other people, they may say, oh, stop overthinking, or you're thinking about that too much. And actually, that might not be the case. You might just be thinking about it with great depth
Hmm.
or with great breadth.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if we are naturally that way inclined, can't help that. That's the way in which our brains process information. It's the only way we know how to think about things, with that breadth and depth,
Hmm.
which I think to others can look like overthinking when it's not. So, how does that feel when someone almost accuses you or tells you that you
Yeah.
are overthinking if actually you're not? You're just deeply reflecting or analyzing or just being thorough.
One example of overthinking that is less helpful is those shame spirals and those loops of self-criticism, which often I think can sound like ultimately I knew I was bad. I knew there was something wrong with me and reinforcing that. So going over and over, thinking about it, and actually in a quite a biased way. It's not just overthinking it, it's often overthinking it with a negative slant. That it's not thinking, oh, what did they think of me? Did they think I was boring? Oh, maybe they did think I was friendly. Like that, the positive bit never seems to get a look in. That it's just, oh, they thought I was boring. They thought this thing I said was stupid, and kind of going over that. That just, so that's probably one example where it feels less helpful.
Yes. Another one I really relate to is analysis paralysis.
Hmm.
So as someone who does deeply analyze things, sometimes that's actually really helpful. But other times, what comes up for me, an OCD type trait, is I can get very caught up in trying to make the right choice
Mm.
or the right decision. I kind of experience that sense of sort of being paralyzed where I can't actually sort of make a decision or find a way forwards because I'm obsessing a little bit on things sort of like being right. I wonder if there's a way of trying to figure out what is simply depth of thought and sort of thoroughness, and when does that then start to lead into more unhelpful ways of thinking, which we might call overthinking,
Hmm.
but where, like you said, negative shame spirals, analysis paralysis. I guess another one then would be rumination, the
Hmm.
replaying of events in our mind, going over and over and over past events,
Hmm.
or potentially going over and over potential future scenarios, but in a way that's not serving us, it's just increasing our anxiety and distress. So I guess that would be another one. Well, you kind of said it actually, really, now that I've said it. It's noticing when things are really starting to head in a way that is more negative and ultimately not helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's something about the energy of it as well. Um, so I'm really big on being connected with my body and what the kind of sensations in my body are telling me. And so is it like the words that are coming to mind for me are studious or concentrating or um yeah, like figuring things out, like, am I thinking it through even if it is quite fast? Is it that, or is it from panic? Is it like, oh no, this is awful, I need to sort this out? Ugh. That kind of frantic and negative energy rather than frantic and I'm sure there's a solution out there, let me try and find it.
Energy, I like that. I think that's a good way to check in with yourself when you're in that moment of, thinking quite a lot about something, whether or not you can check in as to how the energy of that thing feels. And also trying to take a moment to actually check in with our body and what might be going on in our nervous system when that sort of thinking is happening, maybe to get clues as to actually whether this is helpful, helpful or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, and learning about the brain has been really helpful for me, and being able to, at points, not always, but at points, realize that when I'm really in that frantic state of mind, my brain is not going to be functioning at its best. So being able to do something else to get myself to feel calmer in my body and then come back to whatever it is that I've been worried about with a clearer state of mind.
Yes, when we can figure out what the function of the so-called overthinking
Hmm.
is, when we can figure out the function of that, it might then give us a bit more information as to why we're finding ourselves doing that. And a lot of the time, the overthinking can be about trying to find a sense of safety or feel like we're in control of a certain situation that's happening. Or, like you mentioned earlier, we're trying to problem solve, but actually we can't land on like a satisfying answer yet. So we keep going.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a big clue for me. Is this thinking helping me to take action, or is it a really good way of avoiding taking action?
I
Yeah,
like that.
that's another kind of big clue for me.
I'm thinking about some questions that we might be able to ask ourselves then when that's happening. So we spoke about checking in with the energy, about checking in with, our body and how that's feeling. And so perhaps another one is just thinking, okay, what is this thinking trying to protect me from?
Great question.
Yeah. So what is it trying to do for me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I often hear people talking about overthinking. They'll say the why doesn't matter. And I find that so confusing because for me, the why really does matter. Like I can get really hung up on the why, but certainly my experience is that if I can get to the why, that I can move forward. Otherwise, I just get stuck. Does that make sense? Is that something you experience?
Yeah. When you say you're trying to get to the why, do you
Yeah.
mean specifically about why you're caught on this thinking loop?
Yeah. Yeah. Or yeah. Where has it come from? Where has this feeling come from?
Yes.
I often hear people saying it doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
But that really doesn't work for me. And the figuring out, which I'd never thought about it until you just said there, the function of it. I was like, that's it. When I
Mm.
understand the function, then I can move forward.
Yes. I am the same. I also like to be able to figure out the why. I do think some of that comes back to control when we can figure out the why. So, okay,
Hmm.
now I feel like I have a sense of control and I can maybe do something with
Hmm.
this. So I wonder when people say about not the why is not important, could be true in some cases.
Hmm.
Maybe we can sit with the discomfort of not knowing the why.
Hmm.
But from my understanding, not knowing the why is really helpful for people who have OCD
Hmm.
because I think then the why can become obsessional and make the OCD worse. And potentially with what we're talking about today, there's going to be an overlap with there's overthinking and then there's obsessional
Hmm.
thinking. And I
Hmm.
know I can lean into obsessional thinking as well. And now that I'm saying that, I'm thinking, do I know how to define the difference?
Well, I think that I don't think there is a clear, kind of solid distinction between the two. That there's like a kind of spectrum. And yeah, even though I know that people will say that about OCD, like again, where I think about my own obsessional thinking, it's getting to the why that has released me. So now I'm feeling nervous about how we put this in the podcast because I don't want to put unhelpful information out there. I think there is something really important here about, I suppose I'm aware it's a really contentious area and that the evidence, the kind of, and that the NICE guidelines are OCD is to be treated in a particular way. And for me, it hasn't been helpful. And to get to the why is what has helped me let go of the obsessional thinking.
But
That
I
feels
say
tricky.
no, I think that's fine. You're speaking about it from your experience. It's not
Yeah.
other people what is and what isn't helpful.
I suppose what I'm thinking about is I don't want to. I'm imagining someone who is really deep in the OCD and hearing me saying actually the why is helpful, and that then reinforcing for them that they should carry on thinking about the why. And just at voicing that I feel a bit uneasy about what I'm saying, but I do actually professionally have worked with OCD in a way that is not, this CBT, ERP kind of approach. Well, so maybe that's the important thing is even with treatments, even with like recommended treatments or evidence treatments or, whatever, is the checking in with, is this helpful for me?
Mm.
That feels really important.
So a bit like I mentioned earlier, for me, I know when I'm stepping into obsessional thinking when it becomes about rightness. So rightness is something that comes up for me a lot. And so
Mm.
I can end up really going over and over sort of in my mind, in
Mm.
order to sort of establish this sense of rightness. I think the other ways in which it shows up for me are around morals and values. That shows up in my thinking, but then it also shows up in my behavior. So just to give an example, I think this was last year sometime. It was chucking it down with rain. I was walking the dogs and along the path I saw two or three slugs smack bang in the middle of the path.
Mhm.
And there were lots of people out walking their dog. I think the rain had come unexpectedly, but it meant the slugs had sort of started to come out and cross the path. So I was like, oh no, they're gonna get trod on. So I was there in the rain trying to like hold the dogs and gently move these three slugs over off the pavement so that they didn't get squashed. And I continued my walk and I turned the corner, and I'm not joking, there was probably about 40 slugs across this length of pavement. And I
Mhm.
just stood there like, I cannot literally move all of these slugs
Yeah.
off the pavement. So I just stood there a little bit like, oh no, I don't really know what to do here because usually I move them gently to the side. There's just far too many. So I
Mm.
kind of had to do a bit of a real check in with myself and be like, right, you can't physically move all of the slugs. You've moved a few, you're just going to have to let the universe do its thing. So I walked around on the opposite side so I didn't step on any. But then when I got home, all I kept thinking about was the fact that I didn't move those slugs and I
Mm.
wasn't doing anything with my evening. Would it really have taken much just to stop and move those
Mhm.
slugs to the other side? And I'm sure there'll be some people listening to this like, what? They're just slugs. What, like,
But
but
there'll
they're
also
not
be
to
people,
me.
yeah, and there'll also be people feeling the same way. That's, the other side of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I do the same on holiday in a swimming pool. I'll scoop up the bugs that are falling in the water and put them out to
Aw.
the side. But it was then the evening, it constantly kept like coming into my mind because I think that starts to lead into sort of like my sense of morality and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
so that's when it starts to get, for me personally, that's when I class things as starting to get obsessional.
yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, and I guess I hear in there that similar about is it helpful or is it keeping you stuck? Um, so I guess another kind of thinking is with an ADHD kind of mind. And I think it's often described as having like a scattered mind. And there are obvious kind of drawbacks that come with not being able to, um, I don't know what the word I want to use is there.
Like
Not
sort of
cont
pull all those threads.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, not being able to pull all those threads together. Um, But there are also huge benefits to having a mind that pops off with all these ideas and can be really creative with things or think about lots of different things at once. Yeah, that can be a really good thing. So there's something here about balance is the word that's coming up for me. Does it feel balanced? Even if you're thinking a lot, does it feel balanced? Yeah.
Yes, and I think balance is maybe a bit hard to achieve if you have several streams of consciousness and conversations going off in your
Right.
mind at any given time. It's almost like, well, I can't keep track of all of them and where they're going and whether that's helpful or not. So I think that must be really, really difficult on that front of having sort of a really busy mind, particularly ones that ADHDers would relate to. Is other people just sometimes not understanding how much you're holding in your head at any one given period of time, and that if you do zone out or if you have missed part of the conversation, I think other people will then interpret that as lack of care, lack of interest, or rudeness. But it's unless you know what it's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to then focus on one thing at a time when there are several things going off in your head at once. And again, I
Yeah.
think that's where people are shamed or feel wrong for the way in which their brain operates, even when, as you've said, it can lead to really creative, beautiful things.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I feel like so we've got intrusive thoughts, but and I know that's not the same as obsessional thinking.
Maybe we could just take a moment to acknowledge intrusive thoughts. And even though intrusive thoughts, I wouldn't put them under the category of overthinking, but I do wonder if there is a link or connection between someone who has a very active
Mm,
mind, particularly if you're someone that has quite a visual mind as well. I'm just wondering if there might be a link there in terms of whether or not you're more likely to experience them, and perhaps something not to get into now, but maybe just to make that acknowledgement that we might also be more prone
yeah,
to
yeah,
intrusive thoughts.
yeah, yeah. It sounds like a really interesting thing to go and find out about. But I can see how that would be the case.
One thing that actually I'd like to talk about in relation to sort of overthinking, and it's something I find really fascinating and have been on a bit of a journey in myself to kind of figure this out, is the way in which we all think and interpret the world is also different from
Hmm.
person to person. So,
Yeah.
right now, as we're talking about overthinking, I'm aware that you and I have both made mention to this internal monologue
Yeah.
in our minds. And whether that is just one straight monologue or whether it is actually a conversation that you can hear in your mind almost between yourselves with the voices back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not something I can speak to because I don't experience it. But I know, there are some people that don't have an inner monologue.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to think about how overthinking comes into it with different ways of thinking, because we have people that don't have inner monologues. We have people who aren't very visual thinkers
Hmm.
or aren't have no mind's eye at all,
Hmm.
aphantasia. And then there are people like myself. I've recently learned that I pretty highly fit the criteria for hyperphantasia.
Mhm.
where I am incredibly visual, and to the extent that those visuals almost seem like reality in my mind, and I can experience all of the senses
Mhm.
in my mind. And if I was to think about having a conversation with you in my mind, it's your voice that I'd be having the conversation with and that I would hear
Yeah.
in my head.
Hmm.
So I just find all of this really interesting in terms of what people's inner minds are like and how loud it is, because people might experience loudness differently. They might not be experiencing it the way you and I describe it as. And
Yeah.
whilst I can't speak to that because I don't know what it's like, I find that really interesting. And if anyone listening has anything that they want to share about how they experience loudness in their mind, because for me, the loudness is not just words, it's pictures and things like that as
Hmm.
well. So I just find that really interesting to find more about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that difference between, so you might not have an internal monologue, but you can still have a loud mind. Yeah, and all the different ways that that can show up for you. Yeah, just that acknowledgement that it is so personal, that everybody's different, that there is no right way to be, feels very important.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's like when I mentioned having a radio in the back of my mind, playing the
Hmm.
song, I can hear the song as if it's being played on an actual
Hmm.
radio.
Yeah,
And not everybody can experience that. So
yeah.
for me, that's part of the loudness that different things like that yeah, can be there.
Hmm.
At
Yeah,
the same time, the other stuff's going on too. It's like,
yeah.
how does that happen?
Yeah. All these multiple processes going on at once.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do some of us, do you think, have brains that just seem to think more? Is that related to our personality? Is it a personality trait? Is it related to trauma that we might have experienced where we become sort of more analytical, more aware, more conscious? Or is it due to like neurodivergent, ADHD, anxiety, autism? What do you think about that?
See, that's really interesting because I've just gone on about how I think the why is really important. But the more that I learn about, I think particularly the question of, which isn't the whole of what you're asking, but particularly the question of, is it neurodivergence or is it trauma? The conclusion that I am consistently coming to is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And you're not going to get there and you're not going to find out what it is. I am not so interested in the why. I am more interested in what is it like for you? Is it helpful for you? Is it not helpful for you? And what might we do to support you with? Is that acceptance of this is how your mind is? Or is it here are some things that might help you limit some overthinking that is feeling unhelpful for you? But yeah, I guess, some of what I think about is I think the way that and I know neurodivergence is bigger than just autism and ADHD, but they're the two that I'm most familiar with. Um, but I think autistic and ADHD minds are often really misunderstood, and so things are just labelled as overthinking or unhealthy and not helpful, when actually it's just a difference in the way that your brain thinks, that it's perfectly valid, and not just valid, but actually actively helpful sometimes. So there's something about valuing different neurotypes. I think it is also really important to mention trauma. That kind of having been said, because I suppose there can be a sense of, oh, this is just it. This is just how my mind is. I'm thinking about people that will come in and describe themselves as an anxious person, like it's become their identity rather than I've been through these things in my life and now I'm really anxious and this behavior. A really common one that I see is where there has been parentification in a relationship between a parent and child. So where the child, sorry, is taking on the role of being in charge in the family in some way, or having to do the caring, or having to watch out for their parents' moods to be able to manage the situation, really lends itself to a lot of overthinking. That there can be that trauma response of needing to feel like you're in control all of the time. That sense of, if I don't think this through fully, then nobody else will. Like, there's nobody else to take care of me. And if I don't think about things really well and thoroughly, that everything is going to go wrong. That's a really common one that I notice.
Yes. Yeah. Trauma is going to be, a massive part of where some overthinking comes
mm,
in. And I say that not meaning that it has to be, again, those typical big T traumas that people think about. When you say the word trauma, they can be smaller but repeated instances as well, especially things like chronic invalidation or feeling chronically misunderstood. All of that is going to lead to really thinking about social interactions, our behavior, our way of being, and in terms of trying to then catch things before they happen, to edit ourselves and don't do this and sort of do that. And so I think that can come from all sorts of smaller but still significant life events. And then, of course, those bigger ones, and especially childhood, like parentification was a really good example of that. Also, growing up in a household where a parent might have been a bit Jekyll and Hyde, so you're not really sure how to interpret, their responses. So you have to become hyper vigilant to really be aware of the subtleties that might change in a person's tone or the shift in environment. So you're having to be on alert, scanning, reading into everything. And no matter what childhood trauma it is that you experienced, when you end up having to read into
mhm,
everything, that is inevitably going to lead the way to overthinking.
mhm. Yeah.
That will then end up becoming a pattern in all relationships, isn't it?
Right. Perhaps I go back a little bit and just change what I said before. I think it's less about, kind of going back to this question of, is it neurodivergence? Is it trauma? Is it something else? Um, Rather than it doesn't matter, I think what I'd actually say is, often it's both. Often it's both neurodivergence and trauma. That if you're neurodivergent, you're more likely to experience things as traumatic because you have a more sensitive nervous system. And that if you are neurodivergent, I was going to say, and you're undiagnosed, then there is going to be trauma there, most likely because your needs are unlikely to have been met in the way that you need because people didn't know what they were. But it also shows up in people that I know that were diagnosed at young age, just because of the needs not being understood. So it's, rather than spending hours and hours, that I absolutely have done, asking, is it neurodivergence or is it trauma? What I would say is, if you are, or you think you might be neurodivergent, then quite probably the answer is both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That can also be true for people who aren't neurodivergent but who recognize themselves as sensitive.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who has found their way to this podcast is
Yes.
because they relate to this idea of too muchness and sort of sensitivity in the
Yeah.
world. So whether or not you feel the term neurodivergence applies to you, I think if that's your way of being in the world, you will also have been more likely to have experienced trauma
Hmm.
through people not understanding those needs, through the very things we've been talking about, of being made to feel that your way of being in the world is wrong. And so that
Yeah.
is going to lead into overthinking, ruminating, trying to get it right,
Yeah.
thought spiral, shame spirals. I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
all of the above.
Yeah. 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 So, what are some of the ways that we've both tried to quiet the noise? And I'm thinking about both the healthy ones and the unhealthy ones. And what have you done to kind of support yourself with your overthinking?
Yeah. What have I done? What have I done to support myself? I think some of the ways that I've tried to quiet the noise is not necessarily by trying to not think, but more trying to give into or do what the thinking wants. So if I've worried that I've done something, the discomfort and anxiety that is then sitting with me,
Mm,
I would say my response in the past is to jump to alleviate that by doing the best thing that I think I could for the other
mhm.
person, that this feels so uncomfortable and so horrible that I'm just going to do what the thought is worrying about to
Yeah.
negate that. So,
Uh-huh.
as a way to make it go away. But
With a
obviously,
focus on the other person.
yes, if I've been really getting in my head in the past about a social event that I don't want to go to, I've kind of told myself, well, the way to stop overthinking is just you need to make the decision, and everyone else would want me to go. So my decision is, yes, can't wait to be there.
Ah,
And
yeah.
so it immediately is like, okay, cool, I've sorted that out. But obviously, then the next day,
Mm-hmm.
it inevitably returns and is actually 10 times worse because maybe I didn't actually want to go to that social event.
Yeah.
And then I've probably got multiple days of hell trying to figure out, great, how do I cancel this now?
Yeah.
How do I get out of it now? So I think in the past, I've done a lot of things for short-term relief.
Mm-hmm.
I try to not do that now. I am a lot better at it. Still do it, of course, but I'm a lot better. So sometimes it's about how I've engaged with the thought to make it go away. Other times, I think it could be related to creating lists,
Mm-hmm.
writing things down. In the
Yeah.
past, I've not done this for quite a few years now. I imagine it'll be something you'll say as well, but typical sort of scrolling on phones, numbing that out, really
Mm-hmm.
getting into like a game on my phone is
Mm-hmm.
something I used to do. So I'm not someone who has 15 different games on their phone, but I'll just get that one game that I'll then
Yeah.
really get into and
Mm-hmm.
probably play at any given moment.
Yeah.
And I think that was really a way of trying to shut that stuff out,
Yeah.
as well as sort of tuning in, watching TV in a way that's not engaging with the TV show.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Yeah.
zombifying, numbing way of watching the TV show. So they're the main things that come to my mind. And do you do any of
Yeah.
those or anything different?
Yeah, kind of like you touched on. So one of the main ways is really getting into kind of intense planning and trying to intensely plan everything down to the tiniest little detail. And sometimes I can really enjoy that, but sometimes it can be more anxiety driven rather than enjoyment driven. At scrolling on my phone, absolutely. It is one, particularly like in the pandemic, like I would be trying to hoover up every tiny detail about all the things that were going on and everything that I needed to know about, and really getting stuck on that. Politics is another one that I've really done that with. And actually, one of the ways that I've dealt with that is sometimes I will allow myself to have just some TikTok scroll time, and I have really like carefully curated my TikTok feed to be stuff that is supportive and enjoying and nurturing, and that feels like a helpful way to do it, that feels like it's about reconnecting again with my body, is coming out of my mind and into my body, and getting something soothing is one of the main things that I think about when about changing how I respond to it now. Like anything at all that sounds like just think differently. I can't go anywhere near it. I just cannot go anywhere near it at all. It just does not work for me. Um,
Does it work for anyone?
well, I feel I don't know. I feel like again I might say something that I'll get a lot of flack for, but isn't that what CBT often is? It's like just think about it like this instead. And I guess that would be reflective of unhelpful approaches to CBT, perhaps. Maybe there's something there about readiness, and kind of readiness to think differently. But for me, it's very much rooted in safety. That the safer I feel in myself, the steadier I feel in myself, the less I need to overthink things. So for me, actually being curious about which part of me is activated when I'm moving into overthinking, and being curious about what does that part need? What is that part afraid of? Like you said before, what's it protecting me from? Just bringing that curiosity, bringing that compassion in. And yeah, seeing, is it possible to put it down? And if not, not getting into another loop of, oh, now I'm thinking too much and I need to stop thinking, like it just transfers. It just transfers that energy rather than calming it down. Yeah.
I think that's a good point to make, that overthinking is not a bad character trait and something that we need to stop
Yeah.
doing and sort of stop trying to do. I think it's just recognizing that we have that tendency, and how can then we engage in that in sort of a compassionate and supportive way, which honors the times when actually maybe we sometimes just need to work through things in our
Yeah.
mind to a greater depth than other people might. And other times, if it is unhelpful, trying to find ways that we as individuals find helpful. I mean,
Mm.
certainly nowadays, I'll take a lot of pleasure in just getting out with my dogs and trying to stay as much as possible in that present
Mm.
moment by making
Mm.
sure I'm turning my attention to the color of the sky, the leaves of the
Mm.
trees, the sounds that I can hear around me. And it's an
Yeah.
active process that I have to make
Mm.
sure that I'm doing,
Mhm.
but that can turn some of my attention away from my mind.
Mhm.
Another thing that I do now is sometimes I get it out of my head. So that song that's playing, I'll sing it out and I'll sing the whole song, or the monologue that's in my mind, I'll often process that out loud. I'll turn it into an out loud voice. And yes, it does mean I'm walking around the house, like having a full on out loud conversation with
Mhm.
myself.
Mhm.
With my dogs just usually like, what's she saying? What is she doing? Sometimes that just helps get it out of my inside into the outside. Sometimes I can find, I was going to say, like, find enjoyment in overthinking. And maybe,
Yeah.
yes, maybe I'm leaning more into the depth of thought. But it's like you were talking about earlier. Sometimes it can feel a bit like a curse when your brain's like this, and sometimes it can feel like a gift. So
Mhm.
just at the weekend, I couldn't even tell you what I was thinking about now, but it was something very just boring to do with day to day life. And that linked to something else, linked to something else, linked to something else, linked to something else, and ended up with me planning how to move to Spain and looking at properties on Rightmove and deciding I was going to host couples retreats, intensive couple
Mhm.
retreats when I was out there. And then I was researching, and how do you do intensive couple retreats and what are the rules in Spain, and full on deep dive into it. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's a little bit more about how a busy brain can then influence like the behaviors and the rabbit holes and things like that that you can find yourself going down. But I also really, really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
And another thought that just popped into my mind, actually, where I quite like the thinking part, is if, for example, I'm watching a TV series with my partner, he's just watching the show. But in my mind, I'm like, so why did they get that character to do that? And that character, just that must signify something. That must be important for later on. And there must be a reason that they've just dropped that in. That's going to come back later.
Mhm.
And so, not always, but a lot of the time, I'll be like, oh, they're their dad. It's going to turn out their dad. It's going to turn out their dad's not actually dead.
Yeah.
Or it's going to turn out that actually this is the case. And a lot of times, the
Mhm.
majority of times, I might even say, I'm right. I figured out the twist. I figured out the plot
Mhm.
twist. When
Mhm.
I don't, I will rave about that show. I'll be like, this show is the twist, wow, is amazing. Because it's like, it's this a little bit, I feel a little bit superior. Like, even I didn't get this twist. You should watch it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it means sometimes I pick up on those patterns and things because I'm looking into things, because I'm thinking at the same time that I'm watching TV. Whereas, yeah, for others, they're just watching the show. I kind of feel like I've said a little bit there about what we were going to talk about. Firstly, how can we recognize sometimes that our brain is like this? But also, how do we live with the fact that, our brain is like this, rather than fighting
Yeah. So my first thought is always therapy.
it?
It's always, I
Of
just think
course.
it's so I just think it's so helpful. What popped into my mind was when I first started going to therapy. So with my first therapist, I regularly felt like my brain was like a bowl of spaghetti and all my thoughts were like all jumbled up and I couldn't make sense of them and it was just a mess. That was how it felt. It felt like a mess. And I would go into therapy and we'd talk it out with someone who wasn't there to judge me or think that I was thinking too much but would just talk through the situations with me. And it felt like she was getting each strand and like laying it out in a neat line. And that just felt really helpful. So I suppose that helped me to come to terms with, to see my overthinking as not necessarily a bad thing entirely. Um, so being able to draw out what's good about it and then therefore able to make space to think deeply about things. Not seeing myself as the problem, I think, is such a massive kind of piece of the puzzle. So a quote that I absolutely love by Janine Roth, she says, um, if you're doing something that doesn't make sense, look closer. It makes sense. And that's just been really helpful for me to think about whether that's the specific, why am I thinking about this thing, or the overall, like, why do I think so much? And being able to make sense of that is definitely something that's been really helpful. And another thing is that experimenting with what happens if I move beyond the thinking. So starting with small ways. So actually what came to mind was when we started meeting up in person and we would message each other afterwards and be like, I'm in a spiral. This is what I'm thinking and this is what I'm worried about. That actually taking that risk to say to you, oh, I'm feeling this way, allowed you to come back and be like, oh no, like you were fine. And that we would do that for each other. And that, I mean, I think every now and again we might do that, but as a whole, we don't do that consistently anymore.
No, but that's a really good example of how when I said I used to try to get that thought out of me, but in an unhelpful way that was more about the other person,
Yeah.
you're sharing where you get that thought out of you, but actually in a way that's healthy with a safe person where we're able to be vulnerable to share that, get some sort of reassurance back. And then it's like, that worry about how I've just been socially can now be put to bed. And
Yeah.
I know you and I have both spoke about them worrying again about being a bit needy or much by saying that to one another.
Mhm.
Because we've both done it and spoken openly about it. It's paved the way for us to be able to do that. And that definitely helps.
Yeah.
Just to get that out.
Absolutely. Yeah. That we don't need to go around this loop of, oh no, I'm so needy and oh, I'm feeling this way. But just to be like, oh, I'm a human and I'm feeling a bit insecure and having a safe relationship to be able to kind of check that out. And that therapy is a great place to do that. But it doesn't have to be therapy. It can be, with anybody who is able to accept you without trying to change you, that can just hear how you are.
Yeah, it's the fixing part. And that's kind of a little bit about this question, isn't it? In terms of how do we live with it without fighting it? And it's not fighting it. It's not trying to fix it. It's not feeling that we're wrong and that we need to think less or think differently. It's just being able to acknowledge that this is the way our brains operate, whether that's because they were born this way or they've become this way through sort of life experience. And yes, there are things we can do to dial the noise maybe down a bit or make certain thoughts that we're stuck on escape. Sometimes I do quite like those visualizations of placing them on a cloud and watching them float away. Sometimes those sorts of visualizations I think can help. But I would say that ultimately it's about flipping it from fixing to, okay, working with, if this is what my brain's going to do sometimes, okay, how can I work with that?
Yeah.
So here's what we want to leave you with today. If you're listening to this while your brain is doing 17 different things right now, you're not broken and you're definitely not alone.
Your loud brain isn't a flaw to fix. It's just how you're wired, and there are gifts hidden in all that noise, even when it doesn't feel like it.
And maybe this week, instead of trying to quiet your brain, just notice what it's trying to tell you. Is it worried, excited, processing something big?
Not to fix it or judge it, just to listen. Sometimes our brains are actually trying to help us figure something out. Next time, we're talking about something that might feel familiar after this conversation, too serious for small talk. What happens when you're the person who wants to skip how's the weather and jump straight into how's your soul?
We're exploring why some of us feel allergic to surface level conversations and what it's like to navigate a world that seems built on chit chat when all you want is connection that actually means something. But for now, we'll leave you with this question. What would it feel like to trust that your brain is doing its best, even when it's feeling chaotic?
That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.